Hey again everyone, and welcome back to the channel for yet another installment in our new figure showcase series. And actually, this may be the last one for the year, as I'm not really expecting anything else at this point. But going back to the matter at hand, welcome back, and if you're joining us for the first time, this is just a series I do where I do a quick unboxing and review of a new figure I'm adding into the collection, and just give you my personal thoughts. So for today's episode, we're going back to my primary collecting focus, and we'll be taking a look at the latest Tony Stark from Hot Toys, based on the suit-up version seen in the original Avengers movie, following the moment where Loki chucks Tony out of Stark Tower and the Mk7 armor locks onto his wristbands and wraps around him. Very cool scene, and honestly, when you look at this figure, it's another indication that, as always, there is no way that Hot Toys is done with the Iron Man license, and they'll continue to find ways in which to give us Iron Man figures. Now, these aren't really critical figures, or important essential Iron Man figures, but they are standalones that do help recreate memorable scenes, similar to the suit-up version that we got of the Mark V from Iron Man 2. So they definitely serve a specific purpose and are meant to appeal to collectors like myself. So I'm actually open to getting things that are very unique like this. Now, we'll get into the figure in a little bit, but the figure itself isn't very impressive. It's basically a sculpt on a smaller body, but again, more on that later. The selling point here is really the suit-up armored elements. So let's take a look at everything Hot Toys is giving us here. And from the size of the box, you probably already figured that there is a lot. So as you can see on display, tons of armored elements, and the key here is that you're basically getting the required parts to make 3 different looks. 4 if you count just the figure itself with no armor. But it's essentially the suit-up version with the armor just grabbing the wristbands, 1 with the lower portion of the armor starting to wrap itself around Tony's legs, and the last version, one where he's just standing up with the armored suit with more elements of the armor wrapping around him. And then a very interesting display stand with some variations from the norm, as well as a nice hologram of Stark Tower, which is the exclusive bit. So lots to digest here. So let's jump into the accessories in a little more detail, and we'll start with the spare hands here, which actually are surprisingly sparse. Like, there really isn't anything here except for these 2 splayed out hands. And the sole purpose here is to recreate the look as Tony is flying through the air. Detail, as expected, is pretty solid. Next set of accessories are the bracelets that Tony wears, which we see him put on during that scene, and that the Mk7 pod uses to lock onto Tony and basically start wrapping and enveloping him with the armor. So they look fine, very small with that target screen visible on the top, but what's interesting is you really only use this with the figure by himself, because as you'll see, the way the armor is designed, it wraps around the wrist and you can't use these with the deployed armor look. Next accessory is exclusive for the set, and that's the hologram of Stark Tower. Not essential by any means to this figure, but I do think it's a great add-on, and I really like that Hot Toys added in this red piece of plastic on the interior, because it does recreate the types of holograms we see in the movie. So I thought that was a very smart move on their part. Detail in this is actually really nice, and you can see the landing pad as well as the imprint of the Stark name on the side, so not bad at all. So look, I'm not going to bore you by going over each piece of armor individually, because then this would be a ridiculously long video. But seeing everything on display, you can see that it is a lot, and not every component is used for every display option, and you do have to swap out a lot of elements. For example, some of the arm pieces actually are comprised of both top and bottom elements that snap around the figure's arm, but in some of the display options you aren't showing that, so you do have to kind of take apart those pieces. My only bit of advice to you is to proceed with caution and slowly, because while these are all stunningly detailed elements of armor, they're also very delicate, and to give you the amazing aesthetics, some of the connection points are small as possible, so you do want to avoid any issues when you're taking these apart. So you do get a fully deployed suit with the compacted legs that can be used to show the armor hovering above Tony, and then you can remove the lower torso to create a look where the armor is starting to wrap around him. On top of that, all the elements, including the chest armor, some of the shoulder pieces, or even the legs, do include moving parts, so you do have a ton of ability to really customize these, even though the goal is to create one of the 3 preset looks, which I'll show you as we go. But again, without a doubt, the level of details that Hot Toys has put into this armored element is insane. From the moving parts to the sculpted minute details of pistons and moving elements, down to the perforated metal panels, just truly amazing. Okay, so final accessory that I wanted to discuss here is the stand. And look, the stand itself is the standard hexagonal base we've gotten with a lot of these Marvel Hot Toys figures. And as expected, you do get a flexible flight pole to hold the clamp and in turn the figure in a flying pose, which is critical for this release. But you do get two additional components. The first at the bottom is basically a support for the figure's lower torso. Now, if you've used these stands, you know that sometimes the figure tends to rotate on the clamp a little, so clearly this is an attempt to ensure that the figure remains securely in place. The second is a peg that is actually used with one of the looks, and that's to support the armored suit on top of the Tony Stark figure and create the illusion from the movie. So pretty simple yet ingenious design to let us create that. So now let's get into the figure and start with the sculpt. And honestly, I hate to tell you this, but this is kind of where things slip. And what had the makings of an amazing, breathtaking figure overall does take a bit of a hit here and a bit of a downgrade. So does it look like RDJ? And more specifically, does it look like him from the first Avengers? And the answer to that is, from certain angles, I think he does. I can see what they were going for here with the look of having his mouth slightly open, and maybe it's something that may improve with the eyes a little bit if you can shift them to look a specific way. But with the way it's set up out of the box, I just think the eyes missed the mark, and as a result, the sculpt takes a hit. And while the sculpted hair looks great, it's almost like they made his forehead way too pronounced. I mean, it still looks like him, and it still looks like they did a good imitation of his look, but there's just something that doesn't hit. Maybe even looking a little bit older than he did in the movie. It is unfortunate because Hot Toys has really delivered some amazing Tony Stark head sculpts, but unfortunately I don't think this one hits the mark. And maybe it's also the expression just making the figure look almost a little bit too aloof. Now, as for the figure itself, it's fine. Very, very simple, and a very skinny body as well. Maybe almost too skinny. I know Tony is slim and has never been a Steve Rogers or Thor, but he looks a bit frail here. Or maybe it's just that the clothing sits a little bit too loose on him. Outfit is very simple with a t-shirt over a long sleeve shirt. Now, for those who have seen the movie, who at this point I think is just about everyone, this is supposed to be a Black Sabbath t-shirt, so clearly Hot Toys was unwilling to pay the licensing fee for this one. So they removed the text over the face on the shirt and also modified the face so it looks similar to what we saw on screen, but isn't an exact replica. So very sneaky by Hot Toys to avoid some licensing issues. But the rest of the clothes are basic. Just some black slacks and then a pair of black shoes with molded laces. Now, he does include an arc reactor underneath his shirt, but you need to install batteries, and honestly, it's such a pain, so forgive me for not showcasing that feature. Okay, so with that out of the way, let's jump into the first look here, and that is Tony flying through the air with the suit just starting to basically capture him and wrap around him. Visually, it's such an interesting appearance because it really is most of the suit in the process of unfurling and deploying. And the way you set it up, you do remove the bracelets from Tony's wrists and instead slip the forearm armor over his wrists. But not only do you do that, you also have to take it apart slightly, removing the lower portion so it looks like they're just starting to grab him. So it just creates that illusion. It's really amazing, and you really get to see the insane pose of the suit flying right behind him, held in place just at the wrists with the leg armor not even deployed, but the rest of the upper body in the process of kind of opening up. And the stand actually works really well, although I did find that even fully clamped on, the post supporting the armor did tend to slip and rotate now and then. So as you would expect, a very delicate setup overall, but the details are just insane, and I think the ability to create this with a lot of moving parts and using magnets, Hot Toys was able to just do something that was incredibly amazing. And while it might come apart, it's not going to break the figure. So as you try to get the figure in position and the armor, you do have some options there. So awesome amount of detail showing the inner workings of the armor. Now, the second look is basically the next step in the armored up process. And here you have the same look for the upper body, although the forearms are more firmly in place around the figure's arms. But as you can see, the lower torso armor has now fully started to grab onto Tony. So interestingly enough, I do think that this is probably the most intricate version of the suit up, since you do have a lot of the previously hidden leg armor now visible along with the inner workings as the suit continues to expand. You will also notice in this version the post that you needed to support the armor above the Tony figure is no longer required, and that's because now that the armor is connecting around his legs, you basically have a more solid bit of fixity on the figure. So it's a more intricate look in terms of parts, but in another respect it loses some of that charm we saw from the first option, where you really get that amazing illusion of the armor just floating above everything. So like I said earlier, this is definitely the way in which the armor is displayed This is definitely the more complicated way, I think, in which the armor is displayed, where you do get a number of those added elements. And a lot of those elements also do connect via magnets to the base armor, so it's actually a good feature to avoid potential breaks with small pegs or anything. Although I did have one magnet fall out, nothing that a little glue couldn't fix, but I do think it was a good solution to avoid having small tabs, again, that would be susceptible to breakage. And in addition, when you're trying to push the figure, it helps to reduce the stress slightly. And then final configuration is just the figure standing with the armor further wrapping around Tony. So it does have a chest piece fully wrapped around him, and the arms are now fully gripping the figure's body. Still maintains the intricacy of the leg armor, but honestly, while in its own right it looks great, when you have these other two display options, it does feel to me like the weakest look of the bunch, which I think is a testament to how good all the elements look, that this is me saying that this is the weakest. Because honestly, had we not had those floating looks, the detail here would be equally impressive. But this is an impressive overall setup, and it's kind of insane. The level of detail that Hot Toys was able to achieve here is just impressive. And unfortunately, the issue I had here was the sculpt, which is just a bit off to me. So that's a major component of these figures, and that's the only thing holding this set back from being almost perfect, because everything here just impresses. So honestly, a great addition to the collection, really showcasing that great Hot Toys engineering and recreating a very iconic scene. So I'm very happy to have it in hand, but let me know your thoughts and we'll touch base on the next video.